Today's video is about what can affect population size and also the classic curve that you get when you introduce a new population to an area. Before we start, energy and ecosystems, this topic uses a language of its own. It's really important that you know the definitions for all of these words. So it's worth making a glossary of these terms and practice using them. So, what happens if you introduce something like a population of deer to a new woodland? And it's the same with all organisms. So at the beginning there's a lag phase, there's slow growth. That could be due to a limited number, difficulty finding a mate, difficulty finding food sources, etc. And then you have the exponential log phase, rapid growth. The population doubles every generation. And then things start to limit the population size. You start to get intraspecific competition, so competition between the same species. And then they fluctuate around the carrying capacity. So the birth rate and the death rate is roughly the same. So that's the stationary phase. It's a stable state, no overall growth over time, but small fluctuations due to food supply from year to year, for example. This is a population growth curve for an organism that would be grown in an enclosed environment, so perhaps bacteria or yeast grown in like a conical flask here. So you need to understand why the curve is that shape and be able to explain the different phases. So first of all, again, we've got the lag phase, we've got slow growth, and then you've got the exponential phase, where the population doubles every generation. If you could just answer what process is causing that exponential growth. If you pause the video and answer that. So that'd be, if this was bacteria, that'd be binary fission. So one bacterial cell becoming 2, becoming 4, becoming 8, becoming 16, etc. So the population doubling every generation. If you think back to your mathematical formula, so it's 2 to the power of n being the number of bacterial cell divisions, will give you the population size. You then got the stationary phase, where again you've got intraspecific competition. It could be for space, it could be for glucose or amino acids that would be in the nutrient broth. So the birth rate, or not the birth rate, but the rate of cell division would equal the rate of death of the bacteria or the yeast. And you've got the decline phase. Can you suggest reasons why this might occur? You could just jot that down and pause the video. So this is when the death rate is greater than the rate of cell division. And over time, within the enclosed environment, toxins build up. So it could have become quite acidic. Often acids are produced as a byproduct, or too much carbon dioxide can produce too much carbonic acid in the mixture. Or there might be byproducts like ethanol produced through anaerobic respiration, which could start to kill the bacteria or yeast. Or it could be due to the respiratory substrates like glucose running out, so they can't carry out respiration anymore. So that's why and eventually all the bacteria or yeast would die. It's also important to note that we've got the log number of cells. If you could just jot down the reason why for that again. So pause the video. And that's due to the fact that the range between the number of bacteria in the stationary phase and the number of bacteria, say down here at the beginning of the lag phase into the log phase, there might be a few thousand bacteria here, but there could be many millions of bacteria here, so you couldn't fit that range of data on one graph. So you've got to make a log scale so you can fit the large variation of data, large range of data on the same graph. So two important words we need to understand are abiotic factors and biotic factors. So these are things that can affect population size. So abiotic factors, they're non-living factors. And there are some examples here, like light intensity, wind speed, rainfall, humidity, temperature. So all of those different things influence where organisms can live. If you think about the world, different organisms live in different places. So polar bears live where they do, in the Arctic, for the reasons of needing ice, for example, and feeding on seals, which also need ice. If you think of other species that live near the equator, or in rainforests, they might need it to be warm and humid to be able to survive, but couldn't survive anywhere else. You've also got biotic factors, living things that can affect population size. So one that you will talk about more than anything other in the questions will be competition. It's really important that you say what the organisms are competing for. Remember, you've got animals and plants. So plants could be competing for things like light, space, water, minerals. Animals could be competing for things like mates, for example in this picture here, or territory, or food. And all those things can limit population size. There's also predation as well, and we'll look at predator-prey cycles in the next video, and disease can also can cause dramatic drops in population size. So we looked at the population growth curves before. So intraspecific competition, so you need to know the difference between intra and interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition is competition within one species. And they all compete because they all occupy the same niche. If we just zoomed in on the stationary phase over here, the small fluctuations, when the population rises beyond the carrying capacity, which we've got here, so that's like the maximum population that the habitat can support. When the population rises above the carrying capacity, you have more intraspecific competition. Remember to always name what they're competing for, so it could be for food. So some will starve and die, over time the population will drop a bit to below the carrying capacity. Now there's plenty of food available, so there's less intraspecific competition. I'll just name what you're competing for food, so then the population can rise, etc. So that's one of the reasons you might get fluctuations around the carrying capacity. Interspecific competition is competition for resources between different species. So interspecific. So if you're just looking at, if you've got a lawn or if you go to the park, just have a look. It's not just grass that's living there. So you've got weeds competing with grass. Dandelions are really good at outcompeting grass. So it can lead to competitive exclusion, where one species crashes and is completely outcompeted by another, and one can become extinct in a habitat. This will definitely happen if two occupy the same niche, or is more likely to happen. And niche is a really important word, the role an organism has in the environment. So if two things have the same niche, they have the same role, and so they're going to be competing with each other. So one will outcompete the other that is better adapted to that environment to carry out that role. So here we've got some examples of interspecific competition. So this is in a closed container, so there's limited food available, limited space available. And you can see in both of these, so this is where you've got two species of flower beetle, and you can see at the beginning they both the population of both starts to increase, but as soon as food becomes limited, as soon as they start to have to compete with each other for food, this species use the keyword outcompetes this species down here that's in blue, and so these will starve and then become extinct. So those are three important words in this situation. What they're being outcompeted for, in this case it was food or space. What's the consequence? They're going to starve and then they become extinct. This other example over here, we've got P. aurelia, so two species of paramecium, so P. aurelia and P. caudatum. You can see when grown alone, you've got the classic population growth curve. So lag, log, reaches stable, so the carrying capacity. For the other species, for P. caudatum, you've got the lag, log, and then the stationary phase again. But when they're grown together, you can see that after this point here, P. caudatum starts to get outcompeted by P. aurelia. So P. aurelia starts to increase, and it's increasing less quickly than before. The line is less steep because it's having to compete for food and for space. But then it outcompetes, keyword, P. caudatum. The P. caudatum might starve because it might be outcompeted for food, and then eventually the P. caudatum becomes extinct. So they both occupied the same niche, so one has outcompeted the other and one has become extinct.